Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. I know you spend a lot of time on the virtual platform. I see a lot of you have your cameras off, which is totally fine. You are welcome to do that. I think kind of my plan for the presentation is to probably spend 20, maybe 30 minutes kind of just talking through the college essay, maybe providing some helpful tips to you as you're kind of going through this process. And then I'll kind of open it up for questions. Feel free as we go throughout the presentation, if you want to go ahead, if questions come to mind about things that I'm talking about and you want to put them in the chat, totally fine. And then at the end, I'll start to look through some of those, or we may just sort of set it up where you can, turn off or unmute yourself and throw out questions. But I'm just going to kind of dive in. And I sort of wanted to start with this first slide as sort of framing this essay now, because you think a lot about the essay, but really sort of the goal of this, and I think as you're working through your application, is all about finding your voice as you're going through this process. And we recognize the challenge that you have in trying to sort of communicate who you are on a piece of paper. You're trying to sort of take your personality, who you are, and kind of put that down on paper. And that's a tough task that you're trying to do. We want you to be as authentic as you can, and we want you, as you're filling out this application, and not just the essay, but as you're filling it out, really trying to let your voice shine through this application. So I'm going to kind of use that to frame our conversation today. So just a little bit about sort of what the plan will be. I kind of want to broaden this out a little bit and sort of frame kind of what holistic admissions is and how the essay fits into that. Then we'll talk about ways in which you can help kind of find your voice, kind of the role of the parent and guardian, but also teachers, counselors, peers in this process. And then I'll provide you a few sort of tips around the essay and maybe sort of a checklist of things that you can be thinking about if you're starting to put thoughts down on paper, put together drafts of this essay, because it is a different type of writing than you have typically done for high school assignments. And so we'll talk through that as well. So holistic admissions, it is one of these things that is certainly overused in the college admissions process. Those of you that are seniors are probably already tired of hearing holistic admissions and really sort of what is that. And by the time you're done with this process, you'll probably never want to hear it again. And I totally get that. But just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page of what is holistic admissions, we are looking at the whole student in this process. It's not just the academic piece. We're not just taking a test score and a GPA, punching it into a calculator and sort of moving on. There's a lot more to this process. I think a lot of us that are practicing holistic admissions will always say when we approach your file, it's sort of academics and in this application, because there's more to you than that. Academics sort of bring you into the conversation. I think that's one of the first things that we are tasked with understanding is, are you prepared to handle the academic rigor at our institution? But that's just the first piece of the puzzle. We also want to see what impact are you making in the community? What are you going to bring to the table there? What are your characteristics, your personality, your story? And so we really start to get that through these other areas of that application. The personal essay, extracurricular activities, the recommendations, and for those of us that have supplemental essays, those very specific essays that really start to dive into that particular institution. And while today I'm going to focus mostly on that personal statement and personal essay, I will also provide a little bit of insight into the secondary essays and sort of topics as well. So keep in mind too that when your application comes to an admissions office, it's not just one person that's looking at that application. There's going to be multiple eyes on it. Using Vanderbilt as an example, I always tell students that, I work with students in the greater Boston area. I am not the first person to see your application, nor am I the last person to see it, but I'm probably the one that will see it the longest because of the second point here, is that I'm able to bring context to your application. I have worked with students in Boston now. I'm heading into my 7th year. So I very much kind of understand the context of students in the greater Boston area, how things work at your high school, and I'm able to sort of bring that lens to your application. But keep in mind, not when we're just looking at your academics, but when we're looking at every aspect of your application, we're always bringing context to that evaluation, because things look different depending on where you're going to school across the country or across the world. And of course, right now, things look very, very different in terms of your context. We've always been using context in the admissions process. This year, that context just looks very different. We know your academic experience, your involvement because of the pandemic look very, very different now. So just know that we are bringing that context to the application review process. So as you're trying to, how do you find your voice? I mean, that's a very tough thing to do, to try to figure out, okay, how do I find my voice as I'm filling out this application, as I'm working on this essay? So when you're thinking about the topic, and I don't know if any of you have looked at sort of the application prompts and questions that you have, but you see that you have options, and there is no trick here as to which one you pick. I think you can write a very successful essay no matter what topic that you pick, what question you choose to answer. But really think about what is important to you, because if it's not important to you, it's going to be probably really tough to sort of write this essay. It's going to require you to do a little bit of self-reflection, which I know can sometimes be a little bit uncomfortable as you really start to kind of unpack, like, who are you? What is your personality? How would you describe yourself? But you're going to kind of have to identify your feelings and beliefs, thinking about your qualities and your strengths, and maybe some of those things that you might want to communicate in this essay. Really, you want your personality to shine through. And I also really want to say, you want to be your authentic self as you're doing this. Authenticity is the biggest piece of advice I could give you in this application. I think a lot of times you feel pressure to sort of like, how do I be unique in this process? How do I stand out in the process? And that's a tough thing to be. I mean, there may be life experiences that you have, things that really are unique, but it's very, very hard to be unique in this process. But if you are sharing a piece of your personality, a piece of your story that is sort of original to you in this essay, really what we're trying to get out of this essay. So really kind of think about that authenticity. When it comes to sort of vocabulary, I know sometimes you sit there and you're like, well, I've got to make this essay sound as fancy as possible. So let me pull out my thesaurus and throw out all these words. If that's how you normally write and you use a lot of big words in your writing and that makes sense, go for it. But use the vocabulary that you actually use. This is not really a time that you need to sort of show off your ability to Google fancy words. Use your voice in this and really tell your story as you're working through this essay. And keep in mind that you only have 650 words at most in this essay. So you cannot tell us your whole life story, and we don't expect you to. We're not expecting you to cover everything about who you are in this essay. Keep it focused. And really, I think the question that you are trying to answer, I mean, again, pick any of these topics that you want, but what is one thing that you want us to know about your character, about your personality, about your story that isn't captured anywhere else in the application? That's really what you're trying to answer as you tackle this personal statement. Again, totally fine to work with other people as you're working on this essay, and you have a lot of great resources that you can tap into. Maybe you're using a teacher or a counselor. It's going to help you with an essay or provide feedback on that essay. Maybe you have a parent or guardian that takes a look at that essay or helps you as you're brainstorming things. Maybe it's sitting down and having a conversation about how you would describe yourself and see if other people, you're bouncing ideas off of them. You know, they're like, does this sound like me? Is this how you would describe me? Are these some of the words or things? Is this kind of how my personality is captured? But at the same time, make sure that as you're going through this writing process, if you have people that are looking at this essay and providing feedback, make sure by the time that it gets back to you, that it still sounds like you wrote this essay. I promise we can always tell when a student writes the essay versus, let's just say, someone older writes that essay. We want it to have your voice, your vocabulary, your story here. So make sure it really is your authentic work in this process. But certainly feel free to use other people as you're sort of going through this. And you may have heard other folks sort of say this, sort of the ultimate test that if you're having other people look at this essay is this: when you finish this essay, maybe you were to take a draft to school that you were going to give to your teacher. You forgot to put your name on it, but you left it on your desk. And if one of your friends or a teacher or a counselor were to grab that essay and kind of read over it, and they were like, oh yeah, I know exactly who this belongs to. That's kind of that sign of a successful essay where you have really sort of communicated something about yourself. So as you're trying to sort of think about, okay, how do I start this? Because I think honestly, that's the hardest part, is just getting started on this essay. Like, where do I even begin? Sometimes you pull up a Word document and you just stare at it and you're like, I don't even know what to write. Before you do that, I would really try to sort of do a lot of brainstorming kind of leading into this. So first of all, the key is sort of finding that topic. So figuring out which essay prompt you want to tackle. And then let's say you decide to do like the significant event or risk. Okay, start brainstorming some events or risks in your life and just start writing them down on paper to sort of think about what are some events or things that come to mind. Maybe it's an influential person as the essay that you choose to do. And again, just start kind of writing some things down and thinking about what topic might excite you, what is interesting to you there. But that's sort of the first task that you're trying to sort of figure out, what do I want my topic to be? And then as you're going through this, again, this is a great opportunity to use peers, parents, guardians, counselors, teachers. As you're throwing out, topics, just ask them, does this sound like something? Am I trying too hard here? Is this authentic to me? As you're starting to sort of think about that topic. And keep in mind, if you choose like the significant event or risk, I think sometimes when you hear like significant event or risk, you're like, it has to be this huge life-altering, life-changing event. It may not be. It could be some everyday task or everyday thing that you're doing, but that has changed your perspective or has shaped who you are. And keep in mind that maybe the first couple things that come to mind for you are things that come to mind for everyone in this process. And maybe it's topic 4, 5, 6, 7 on your list that is a little bit more specific and authentic to you. But again, spend some time sort of jotting down, brainstorming ideas and kind of thinking about where you might want to take that. This is probably going to take you a couple different drafts to really get this where it wants to be. And it's totally fine if that first draft is just sort of a stream of consciousness, just getting things down on paper. I'm a big fan of actually writing on paper. I know, sometimes you pull up the Word document, you want to just start typing, but sometimes it's easier just to write on a piece of paper and sort of get some ideas out there. And if you need sort of some strategies to this, I've run some essay writing workshops where you sort of throw on a timer for 5 minutes and you just start writing. Don't worry about paragraphs. Just start writing some thoughts down, some sentences down, some words down, and whatever it might be, and time yourself for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, stop, kind of see what you have down on paper. Maybe highlight certain words, certain sentences that really stick out to you, and then do it again for another 5 minutes, sort of building off of that. And if you were to do that 3 or 4 or 5 times, before you know it, you have 2 or 3 paragraphs written, and you have sort of this foundation of an essay started. And then you can start to go back and proofread it, put in transitions, make it sound nice, structure it, but just getting thoughts down on paper can really help you a lot. We also often talk about this sort of incubation period. Maybe you write something down, you type up that draft, and then you leave it for a couple days or even a week, and then you come back to it with a fresh set of eyes, and you might have different perspectives or different thoughts about it. And again, it might take you multiple drafts to sort of shape this essay to where you want to be. I also think it's going to have a very different structure than most of the writing assignments that you do for school. Most of the time, the writing you're doing in that classroom setting is going to be, sort of a research type paper, a reflection type paper. And the English formula is sort of you write an introduction, you use 2 or 3 paragraphs to sort of unpack that, and then you write that conclusion. That's sort of your standard thing. And that's great. For English assignments, you should absolutely keep doing that. For this personal essay, because you don't have a lot of room, you sort of want to bring us into your topic as the reader pretty quickly. Provide us any context, any background that we need, but then you really need to get at the heart of what you want to share in that essay and then sort of wrap it up pretty quickly, because again, you don't have a lot of space. So it's going to have a little bit of flow, but it should still be structured well. It should have paragraphs, should flow well, but it's going to have a little bit different feel to it than maybe some of the papers you have done for classes. Make sure as you're going through that you proofread this. I know sometimes it's easy to just use spell check and think that spell check will catch everything. Spell check doesn't catch everything. And I'll use an example I stole from a colleague about a student who wrote an essay about tutoring other students and sort of the impact that had on him. but accidentally in one spot used torturing instead of tutoring. Hopefully he wasn't actually torturing the students, but both of those are words, and that's not going to be picked up by spell check. So just make sure that you really are proofreading and looking through that, and that it is a well-structured essay. So as you're thinking about sort of going back and looking at it, these are some questions that I think can be very, very helpful as you're thinking about this essay. You know, is that essay interesting? You know, as you read back there, are you sort of capturing the reader? Are you sharing something about yourself? And I kind of have kept saying, you know, you want to share something about yourself in this essay because it is a personal statement. And I know that may seem very, very obvious, but I think one of the biggest mistakes that we see from students is they take this significant risk or significant event essay and they spend the whole time talking about that event or risk, and then there's 2 sentences at the end about the student. Same thing with the influential person. They spend that whole essay writing about that person, and then very little is shared about themselves. And I get done reading that essay and I'm like, wow, I really want to admit the person that influenced you, but I have really learned nothing about you in this essay. So make sure you really are communicating something about yourself that will kind of be interesting and also that will stand out. Again, I know I talked about being unique is hard, but if you are sharing something about you, that's going to stand out in this process. And I think one of my favorite things when we are talking about students in committee, again, most of the students that we are talking about are academically capable. They're very, very strong in terms of their involvement and their leadership and their impact. But it's really great to sort of sit there and unpack this essay and learn a little bit about the character, the personality of the student. That can really stand out as you're going through the process. Going back to, is this something that is important to you? We talked about that sort of at the beginning, but it really should be something that is important to you, that you are sharing about yourself. And do you illustrate this issue, story, experience? Again, you've got to probably give us some context in this essay as you sort of bring us into the moment, but the focus should still be on you as a student. Again, making sure that this has kind of a logical flow to it, because in the one sense that we are learning about your personality, your story, your background, this is also one of the few times in the application where we get to see a writing sample from you. So we want to see that you communicate effectively, clearly, concisely as you are writing this personal statement. Again, as you're going through, just like you would for a typical writing assignment, you want to make sure that it flows well, that you have these transitions that are making, if you are decide to talk about a couple things and tie them together in that essay, make sure that the transition is there, that the flow makes sense as you're writing this essay. Also keep in mind the length. There are no bonus points here for writing more than what is asked for in that essay. Again, there's a reason that there's a word limit on that, because we want to see you be able to communicate something effectively about yourself in this shorter writing sample. And this is also particularly when you get into sort of these additional supplementary essays that are out there. Sometimes you'll see some that are asking for 100 words, 150 words, 200 words. They kind of want more of a short answer because they want to see if you can answer that question in a concise manner. And that's a whole kind of different measure of sort of success there in terms of answering that question. So keep that in mind as well. Really focus on sort of that word limit. Also kind of want to, at this point, talk a little bit about sort of what about these supplementary essays and how should they look different than that personal statement. Keep in mind that the personal statement is something that if you're using the Common application, the Coalition application, QuestBridge application, one of these applications that's accepted by multiple schools, everyone is going to see that personal statement. So it needs to be a little bit more sort of general, something that you want every college or university to know about you as you're going through this process. The supplemental essays are very, very specific to that school. So only that school is going to see those essays. So because of that, you want those to be much more specific in nature. And I know one of the most common ones that's out there is the sort of why this institution, why are you looking at this school? And the key to those essays is making them specific enough so that you could only write that essay for that school. So let's say, for example, you did like a why, I'll pick on Yale, why not? A why Yale essay. You should not be able to then take Yale out and put in insert another school and be able to send the exact same essay to that school. If you're able to do that, that means that your essay is not specific enough. So you need to be able to really, and the whole reason that these schools are asking these supplementary essays is they're trying to sort of think about, are you the right fit for their institution? They want to see that you have done a good amount of research and are able to sort of communicate that you're able to say more than, well, you're known for your reputation, you have great academics. They want you to be able to provide that next level of sort of interest and engagement. And it helps them as they're sort of thinking about the fit there. For Vanderbilt specifically, we don't have a lot of supplemental questions. We really just ask you to talk about one activity in depth, which may seem very simple, and it is. I mean, it's really just a short answer there, but that's also a big part of sort of our community. We are all about balance in our community. And as much as we're focused on the strong academics in the application, we want students that are going to come to our campus and make a big impact outside the classroom as well. And so this short answer allows you to talk about one of your activities in depth, talk about the impact, the passion there. And so when I'm looking at that, that gives me an indication, okay, if you were to come to our campus, the type of impact that you might make in our community. And that's a big part of sort of our review, is thinking about sort of that balance there. So as you're tackling these supplemental essays, the key there is just making sure that they are really specific and that you really are meeting kind of what the question asks, and also keeping in mind sort of the length there. You also want all of your writing in this process to be very clear and concise, and going back to making sure that it really does sound like you. And again, if you have others look at it, make sure that that voice is still there. Again, if I can't emphasize it enough, as you're going through this, as you are writing essays, as you're thinking about this, it's all about authenticity and having sort of that authentic, and we want that in all aspects of your application. Is trying to tell your story, trying to communicate who you are through this essay. I mean, really, as an admissions officer, and I think most of us would agree across institutions, our favorite part of the application is reading that essay. I know it's probably your least favorite part to do as you're going through and filling out this application, but it is our favorite part to read, because it's one of the few chances in the application that we hear from you directly. We have your academic record, which your high school is sending us. We have these amazing recommendations coming from other people. We may have a test score if you choose to send that to us. We're getting to see a little bit about your interests and passions through your extracurricular activities, but this personal statement is really one of the few times that you just are sort of able to communicate what you want to us, and we learn a little bit about who you are. And this really is your space to do what you want with here. And I know that in some ways that can seem frustrating or confusing, because you're like, I wish you would just tell me what to write. Like, what should I write my essay on? But there are so many different topics and ways in which you can be successful in this essay. So really, and this is kind of what I would leave you with as sort of the guiding question that you're trying to answer. And this, again, doesn't matter what topic you choose to do this with, but you're really thinking about, what is the one thing that I want a college or university to know about me that is not captured anywhere else in my application? And again, keep in mind what you're already talking about in your application, what we're already learning about you. This is your chance to share kind of one more thing, a glimpse, a snapshot into who you are. And I continue to emphasize glimpse, snapshot, story, because you cannot tell me your whole life story in 650 words. And I do not expect you to do that. None of us expect you to cover everything. And I think when you try to do that, you're not able to really dive in that deeply. You're sort of just giving us a very quick overview. We'd much rather have you sort of specifically focus in on one thing that you want to share about yourself as you're tackling this essay. So have fun with it. I know writing an essay may not seem that fun. I think you'll find it's more fun than you think. But just really think about what you want us to know as you kind of go through this process. So that's kind of the official part of the presentation, where I kind of wanted just to cover some bigger topics around the essay. So I kind of want to turn it over to you all to see if there are specific questions that you may have as you are trying to put together this essay, or how we look at that essay, or anything in regards to the essay. So I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can kind of see everyone here. And I will see. Yeah, so if you have questions, I think go ahead and put them in the chat. I'd be curious to kind of see if there's specific questions that you might have, or if you want to just unmute yourself and throw that out there. I think it's a small enough group where we can totally manage that. But I'd be curious to know, as you guys are thinking about this essay, as you're starting to brainstorm and write, are there questions that you have, other topics you want to talk about in regards to the essay? Because I know it can seem like this very daunting and intimidating thing as you're kind of filling this out. So I'm happy to see what questions you might have about this. How you guys feeling about the essay? You feeling okay about things? You can either give me a thumbs up or whatever you're feeling. Okay, yeah, good, great. Feeling good so far. Lots of thumbs up. Wow, you guys are just essay experts. I love it. So that's good. That's good. I mean, I'm glad you're feeling comfortable with it. I think one of the toughest things, it's very weird, maybe even uncomfortable to sort of have to talk about yourself. I think that is not a very natural thing for most people. I mean, there's a handful of people out there that love talking about themselves. We know who those people are, right? But most people, it's uncomfortable to sort of have to talk about yourself. But that's really what you're trying to do as you do this essay, and really what you're trying to do in that entire application. You're essentially, in a lot of ways, bragging on yourself as you're filling out this application. And I promise that's not at all how we view it, because we want to know your story. We want to know who you are. We want to know your interests, your passions, the things that drive you. And so you have to almost brag on yourself to really communicate that through the application.
Got a question from Amari.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So the question that's coming through with Amari is it wiser to write the Common App essay on one point and drive it home, or to show a variety through your writing? So again, my general advice would probably be to keep that essay as focused as possible and kind of revolve it around what is the one thing or the one topic you really want to sort of drive home. Because I think if you try to cover too much about yourself in that essay, you're not really able to sort of dive in deep to that and really provide us a lot of information. So I would probably lean toward kind of keeping it as focused as possible, knowing that there are ways throughout the application to communicate all different sides and variety. I mean, you're able to sort of do that in the extracurricular list. You're able to sort of communicate the things that you're doing, the passions that you have, the interests you have outside the classroom. You do also have this additional information box. This does not need to be another essay that you're writing, but if there are other things about you that you feel like a college or university should know that, or you're just not able to capture in your chart or in your essay, you're welcome to use that. Again, it can be very quick bullet points, a couple sentences. You also don't have to use it. I know the additional information box is one of those things that's sometimes very intimidating, because you're like, what in the world should I include there? And I see all sorts of stuff included there. I see links to YouTube videos, to online resumes, to websites, to who knows what I see there. It's a little bit of everything, but it is a space where you feel like if there's something that we need to know about you that just doesn't fall anywhere else, you're also welcome to use that. But really, I would keep this personal statement as focused as you can on sort of one topic, just because you don't have that much room to sort of talk about everything.
Shane, I have a question that I think would benefit our guys on here. So there's a lot of so-called cliche topics out there that students sometimes are told to stay away from. So we have a lot of athletes at CM, and so I think sports is something that a lot of students might gravitate towards writing about. So how do you take a cliche topic and make it not cliche and your own? Because I know that can be really hard to do sometimes.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. And I am never one to, there's some folks that will tell you just stay away from those topics, right? Don't ever write about a sports injury. Don't ever write about winning a championship. Don't ever write about sort of being on a team and what that's like, because a lot of students do that. And I'm never going to tell you to stay away from those topics, because I think you can still put a unique spin on it. You can still tell, especially if that is central to who you are. If athletics is a central part of your personality and you want to write about that in the essay, I think that's fine. And I know, having been an athlete myself, I know what it means to make it to the championship. I was fortunate not to have a season-ending injury at any point, but I know there are people that are, and that is a huge life-altering event for students. the key is that you keep in mind, you know that a lot of people are writing about a similar topic. So you have to almost work a little bit harder as to how can I take this event, but still put my unique and original spin on it. So you may have to work a little bit harder to do that. I would probably stay away from one of those cliche openings, which I see a lot, particularly for the injury of, I can't tell you how many essays I've seen where like the first sentence is like snap or crack or pop, because that's like, whatever injury is happening. So I might stay away from something like that. But again, I think it is fine if that is central to who you are. Just really think about how can I put my personal story and spin on this to do that. So, and I've seen some great essays that have tackled these more popular topics, but still been able to put that spin on it. But just know that, you're not going to be the only one probably writing one of these bigger essay topics.
Another kind of question, I think, so a lot of sort of pitfalls I see when I read students' essays is they talk a lot about the event or the moment or the activity that they love to do. And then I think, like you talked about, they write like 3 sentences on what does this activity say about me and what have I learned about it? Can you kind of talk about that ratio in the essay of like, let me set this up for you, but then let me share what this says about me?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, when I went through this process many, many years ago, I did the exact same thing. I did an influential character essay. I spent probably 90% of the essay talking about that character, and people probably read that and they're like, wow, that person's awesome. I learned literally nothing about you because I had 3 sentences at the end that talked about how that person sort of influenced and shaped who I was. I still communicated something about myself, but very, very little compared to what I could have done in that essay. So I don't know the exact ratio because it might depend on the event, risk, story, character, and how, but you probably only want to use 2 or 3 sentences, maybe a short paragraph to sort of bring us into that moment or into that event or that risk, or give us the background on that character. Particularly if you choose a character you feel like, the reader probably has no idea who that is. And that's fine, totally fine. I mean, give us enough context to bring us into the moment, but really outside of that, the rest of the essay should be focused on you. So if I had to kind of maybe give a percentage, maybe 10 or 15% is bringing us into the moment, and the rest should be about you. Maybe 20% at most, again, depending on the topic here, but it should very much weight heavily on you sharing something about your personality, your background, your story. And I know sometimes too, you may want to, if you want to tackle like an academic topic, you're like, well, I've already written this essay that got an A for school, that I was like talking about a political issue or something like that, and I want to use that. That's not going to communicate much about you. That might be a very well-written academic paper, and that's great. And I have a feeling, okay, great, you're going to be able to continue doing that at the college level, but I haven't learned anything about you. So again, use whatever amount of space you need to bring us quickly to the moment, and then really dive into sharing something about your personality. Any other questions that you guys have that would be helpful as you're going through this? I know you guys spend a lot of time in the Zoom world these days, so I know that these sessions probably get tiring.
And
I actually have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Kind of to bridge off of what Miss Kaplan said, or what her question was. I've heard a lot of people talk about like how admissions counselors aren't exactly fans of like blanket statements, because that's what they're supposed to be reading through your writing, not by like you just telling them. But I guess my question is, where do we draw the line between what is considered like, what's the word? How do we draw the line between what is like straight up telling the reader about an event or about what you learned, and what is like subtext? I don't know if that question was
like
clear.
Like the show versus tell kind of thing, Amari?
Yeah.
Maybe give me an example of kind of what are you thinking about? I want to make sure I'm fully understanding your question.
Okay.
Put you on the
So
spot.
I was actually reading a friend's essay, and he brings up and one of them he brings up like some advice that like his family has given him, and he does it in a unique way. But something that I pointed out to him was that a lot of the time he will have sentences that go something like this: I learned blank from this, or when my mother said this to me, it taught me over time about humility and how to humble myself. And I think that, and I've heard, at least I've heard a lot of people say that that is like, um, since it is essentially a blanket statement, I've heard a lot of people say that that's like not good for these college essays because RAs want to read through it. So like, I guess the other side of the coin would be something like, um, over time, as as I lost more matches, I started to realize that, I don't know.
No, I
uh,
think I kind of understand where you're getting at. It's sort of like almost like passively receiving advice versus actually how have you taken that and done something with it, and sort of, yeah, this kind of show versus tell. I think I kind of get at what you're saying here, and I think it is better in this essay. I mean, sure, there may be like if you had advice, just using this example, that someone like a friend or a family member had given you that had shaped who you are. I think in this essay we want you to do more than just say, hey, this advice, I learned a lot from it. We want to now say, okay, has this advice or this particular thing influenced how you do things and how you approach life and how you approach the world, or how you approach a sport or playing an instrument or whatever topic you've decided to do. I think that's where you get into the sort of showing aspect
okay.
here. So it's not just sort of passively receiving this advice, but how have you taken that advice and now used it to shape who you are? So I think you could certainly do that with that particular topic, but you'd want to do more than just say, I got this great advice and it is kind of who I am, but how is it influencing what you do? How is it shaping you? So I do think you kind of want to be able to use examples of that. And maybe it's just one example, because that's fine, because you're keeping it focused, but you'd want to be able to sort of show that impact, show that influence of that piece of advice, again, using that example. So I do think you want to do more than just the telling. You also want to do the showing but you may have to do some of that telling to sort of set the stage, and then really use the rest of the essay to sort of show that in an example.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Good question. What else? Anything else that would be helpful as you guys are tackling this essay?
And they can be like, specific to you as well.
Yeah, and they can be absolutely specific. I mean, I've read some essays that, are very, very specific, or they're very, like, it may almost seem like this everyday task that you do, but they have put sort of this spin on it that is just because that's important to you, or that is, you've learned something, or it's changed how you think about the world, or how you think about this aspect. I mean, again, I think I did the same thing. When I read that significant event or risk, you feel like it has to be this life-altering, life-changing event. And you may be like, I haven't had anything huge like that. I mean, obviously we're living through something right now that's certainly a life-altering, life-changing event, but it could be something that is smaller, that is more kind of just centered around you. But yeah, I mean, it really should be specific to you, should be authentic to you as you're doing this. But there's no right answer as to the topic that you pick. I think that's sort of the beauty of this essay, is you can write about a big topic, you can write about a small topic, you can write about something that you feel like no one's heard of, or something that everyone's heard of, and you can still put your original spin on this essay. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. And sort of think about, again, I sort of center around this, what's this one thing you want us to know? But as you read through your essay, and particularly as you have other people look at that essay, ask them that question. Like, if you were to write one takeaway from this essay about me, what is it? And see what they say. And if you're like, yes, that's exactly what I want a college or university to know, then I think you're done. You're like, oh, that was not at all what I was trying to communicate. go back to the drawing board. And that's totally fine. You may not want to hear this. You may have to tackle a couple different topics or write several drafts to sort of get this where you want it to be. And that's not to put extra pressure on this essay. Again, I think it's very different. I'll be honest with you. I would much rather write a 5 or 10 page research paper than a 650 word personal essay, because I'm terrible at writing essays that have to talk about myself. It takes me a very long time to really sort of formulate that and do that. So I recognize the challenge, not putting more pressure on this. It's just different. I don't like talking about myself. It's not a fun or natural thing. Question coming through about what are some common themes in essays that make it pop or stick out more? Again, it's really sort of this, when I read an essay and I am very quickly able to pick up on one thing that I've learned about the student, and I can very easily write that as I'm doing my comments about an application, that is a successful essay. I mean, when I'm able to sort of say, wow, I didn't pick up on this as I was looking through the application elsewhere, but I get to this essay and I'm like, wow, this is what drives a student, or this is what they're passionate about, or this is sort of something important to them that I'm able to sort of quickly and easily pull that out of the essay. That's what really sticks out to me. And I think that allows me, as I am shaping your story, as we think about moving applications through the process, as talking about students in committee, when I can very easily communicate your story to other people that haven't even been able to look at your application, and we're able to discuss that, that's really what you're trying to sort of do in this personal statement. And the same thing as you're doing these supplemental essays. I mean, when schools are being able to look at your essay and very quickly be like, wow, I can see this student being a game changer in the classroom or in our community, or like the way they describe themselves and why they think our institution is the right fit, is exactly how we talk about ourselves and exactly what we're looking for. So when we're able to very quickly and clearly pull that out of your essays, that's what can really stick out.
Shane, I know that a lot of schools, including Vanderbilt, have gone test optional this year. And so, some of our seniors have taken an SAT or an ACT. Some of them have not. Some of them have only taken one and don't feel awesome about their scores. So I think there's been a lot of talk. Does that put more pressure on the essay? Does the essay mean more than ever before? The essay has always meant something, but, not to add more pressure to you guys, but what does that mean for the essay this year?
Sure. Yeah. So I think really this sort of test optional move, if it were to, and I don't want to say that it puts more pressure on any part of your application, but if anything, it might shift the focus to your academic record maybe a little bit more, because if you send us a test score and we have your academic record, we sort of have two pieces of the puzzle there to think about you as a student on our campus. If we don't have a test score, we're going to be looking a little bit heavier at that academic record. That does not mean that there's necessarily an advantage or disadvantage one way or the other. And frankly, as I look at your application, I feel like the academic record that measures you over 4 years of high school is a better predictor, and there's data to back this up, is a better predictor of how you're going to perform at the college or university level than a test that you took 4 hours on a Saturday. So I want you to know, though, the whole reason that schools have made this move to being test optional is not to trick you in this process and be like, good luck, hope you can figure it out. Optional actually means that you need to submit it. We're just telling you optional. We're not trying to mislead. The whole point of this move is to remove this barrier for you in the process. The last thing that you need to be worried about in a global pandemic is trying to figure out how to get out and take an SAT or ACT, potentially getting the virus to have to worry about that. And I know some students have taken this before it all began. They may have scores that they want to send. Great. You may have also taken this before it started and you're not happy with your score, or you feel like it doesn't accurately reflect who you are. That's also fine. You don't have to send it. The optional piece really is truly meant to be optional, to remove that pressure, to remove that barrier. In terms of how it sort of plays into all this, I don't feel like it suddenly puts more pressure on your essay. Now you may be wondering, well, sometimes if I took an SAT or ACT, there's that writing section that you may have been able to look at, and now you don't have that. That's always been optional for us. And frankly, if I'm being honest, I learn a lot more about your writing from what you include in your application than sort of a score that we have that you did on a standardized test for writing. So we've always sort of put a little bit more emphasis on your essay from a writing perspective. So I don't think it suddenly puts all this extra pressure or added weight on your essay that wasn't there before. It's just shifting kind of how we evaluate you academically if we have a test score, if we don't have a test score. And one other thing that I might add too, you may be wondering about this new COVID box that's on the application. Is this a whole nother essay that I have to write? Should I put something there? Is there pressure to do that? Am I at a disadvantage if I leave it blank? Keep in mind, first of all, this should not be an additional essay. That is not at all what this is meant to be. But there is literally no expectation on our end of what is going to come through this box. This is brand new for us. So for us to even be able to sit out there and be like, well, this is what I expect students to talk about, is kind of crazy because we have absolutely no idea. I think it is just the whole reason it was created is so that you have this space that if you want to talk about impacts of COVID, you can do that there, and maybe you don't talk about it in your essay or additional information because you want to talk about other things there. It just gives you a space to talk about that. You may be wondering, well, how do I know if my impact from COVID is important enough to talk about in the application? It is not my place to tell you what's important or not. This has impacted people in so many different ways. Completely up to you how you use that space. But just know this is not something that is meant to make or break a decision. If you leave it blank, perfectly fine. If you talk about impacts, perfectly fine. So again, I don't want you to think of this as an additional essay that you have to write for that application. It's just there as a space for you if you need it.
I have a question about the supplemental essays.
Mm-hmm.
I know for like the main Common App essay, we got to take a lot of time and do a lot of revisions and have a lot of people proofread it. Is that the same for the supplemental essays, or are they looking for like more of us to get our thoughts and why we're interested in the college out?
Yeah, I mean, I would still approach that a similar way, is that you may want and you may have to do multiple drafts to sort of get across what you want to. It also depends on the supplemental essay. I mean, a lot of them, probably very few of them, are going to be a full 650 words. I mean, there are some that are asking you for an additional 500 word essay or something like that, but a lot of them are shorter. They're probably more short answer, more specific to the school. So you may not have as many people look at this as you would a personal statement, or you might not spend. I'd be surprised if you spent the same amount of time on those as you did your personal statement. But again, it might be, if you're writing like a why this institution, it may take you've probably done a good amount of research on that institution to sort of get to a level where you really can speak to why it's the right fit for you. But you still want to proofread it. If you feel like you want other people to look at it, I think that's totally fine as well. A lot of this advice is really just providing you ways to sort of help in this process. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have every essay looked at by a teacher or counselor or parents or peers. But I think having at least a few of those people or a couple of those people look at it just sort of gives you that feedback of like, okay, I think I'm communicating what I want in this essay, but I wouldn't mind if someone else just looked at it to see, are they getting the same thing out of this essay as I'm hoping to communicate? But still make sure you proofread, that you spend the time on that, on these essays. And again, for the supplemental essays, the key there, more so than the personal statement, is making sure that those are very specific to those particular institutions. I've talked with a lot of colleagues because again, we don't have a lot of supplemental essays, but ones that really focus on those essays because they're trying to really understand the fit for their institution, and that can really help them. Great questions. Now we're getting close to the end of our time, and we certainly don't have to go the whole time if you guys don't have other questions, but any final thoughts, questions, concerns, fears? Hopefully no fears. Hopefully you'll feel better about the essay. You guys seem to come in with a pretty good feel for it.
Any last question, guys? Shane is a great resource, so don't be afraid.
I will also drop my email address in here too if you have other questions, just generally speaking, as you're thinking about essays or Vanderbilt specific. Either one is perfectly fine. I'm more than happy to be a helpful sounding board or resource for you as you continue through the process. You have great folks at your school that I know are helping you as you go through this process and are helping with essays. So certainly use them, but just know that you also have people on the other side of the desk at institutions, that we're not sitting here as like looking for ways to deny you, or being the gatekeepers, or whatever you want to say. We're here as a resource, as a help for you as you go through this process. So just know that we're here anytime you need us, and especially during these strange times where things look so different. As you continue through the process, as you're working on your application, definitely let us know if we can help in any way.
Thank you so much, Shane. We so appreciate your time. This was so helpful. I look forward to sharing this with the rest of our students and families. I know that we will all benefit from your wise words today.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. Again, I know you spend a lot of time on the virtual world, so I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come hang out, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Yeah, have a good one.